Hello, and welcome to this updating event. My name is Richard Stowe, and I'm the Managing Director here at Weed Free Limited, and we're delighted to be the lead sponsor of this year's updating events. Weed Free has been an active member and supporter of the Amenity Forum for 12 years. We are a basis amenity assured contractor specialising in railway weed control. Our core staff all hold both railway and pesticide competencies, allowing us to apply herbicides to the rail network here in the UK, both by hand and from rail-borne machines. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the work that we do here at Weed Free, please feel free to give me a call. These updating events are an ideal opportunity for the Amenity Forum to reach out to potential new members, raise awareness and share industry updates and regulatory changes. I hope you enjoy today and find this event both useful and informative. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to John to introduce the first speaker. Thank you very much.
So welcome to the 2021 updating events. A bit different this year, as we all know, because of the restrictions we're under. I certainly know that we're going to miss the sort of break times and chatting and talking to people and you getting the opportunity to raise the questions you would. But hopefully it'll work reasonably well. We're going to trot through the first two presentations, and then you're going to be actually broken into groups, and then we'll have some questions after that before the host presents what they do. So what I'd first of all like to do is to again thank Weed Free, who are our main sponsor of these events, but also Green Tech, who are the event sponsor for today. We're grateful to the member Green Tech for doing that, and as I say, they will present later on. Just to remind you, there are 5 dates. Now, the reason it says Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland does not mean that if you don't live in Wales, you can't go to that event or vice versa. It's just that we're going to give us a more specific focus, country focus for those countries. So, for example, in the Scotland one, we're delighted that the Minister for Rural Affairs is actually going to speak at that particular event. Now, many of you on this call will have seen all these things before, but the famous penknife is still there. I've still got it in my pocket. And I think it's quite important for those who are not as familiar to recognise the complexity of our industry. And if ever there's been a period over the last 12 months to demonstrate how important amenity management is, it has been that last 12 months. You have carried out essential tasks, keeping parks, looking after lawns, looking after sports grounds. And as I often say, as you know, what happens in amenity impacts upon every UK citizen every day, seeking to provide safe, healthy, sustainable and fit for purpose amenity spaces and sports surfaces. And again, just for those who don't know, and I think most of you do, but the Amenity Forum is the voluntary initiative. We've come a long way in 10 years of getting profile of amenity. It's been interesting in the current discussions on the National Action Plan with DEFRA, how amenity now is regarded as a very important area. And back along, as people like Adrian Dixon remember 10 or so years ago, amenity was not in that place. And that's only come about because the people in the sector have come together, working together, committing themselves to best practice, and therefore, as a result, becoming members of the Amenity Forum. That, again, is a busy slide. By the way, all these presentations will be available to people after all the events are finished, and Kate will send out a link for it. Right. Those are the invaluable websites, but again, I'll refer to those later on as well. I just wanted to mention the survey that's currently ongoing. Back in 2016, there was a survey of pesticide use in amenity. I have to say the response was very poor. But that was also due to the fact that the questions used were very much based on agriculture, and therefore were not really suitable for our sector. So the survey should have been 2020, but of course, with all the things that have happened, it's 2021, but it's ongoing now. And essentially, it's vitally important that the sector responds to this request for information. I'm in discussions with DEFRA currently in relation to the National Action Plan and other things, and they really want that information, because it's very easy for me to tell them that Amenity requires pesticides in order to do its job. They want some hard evidence. So if you do get a request to respond to that survey, or if you want to volunteer, please click the link, and it's on our Twitter feed and other things. Please do help me to respond. So, as we say, I will finish in a few minutes, and then we will go on to the policy update. There will be my presentation then on a whole raft of things around change, challenge, and opportunity. There'll be a facilitated session there, and then we'll have some feedback, and then we'll have a presentation by the event supporter. So there is also room for a break there. You'll have about 10 minutes for a natural break, and maybe make yourself a cup of tea or coffee. And as you know, none of my presentations I always include some kind of quotation, and I just thought that this was particularly apt for the conditions we're in there. Someday everything will make perfect sense. So for now, laugh at the confusion, smile through the tears, and keep reminding yourself that everything happens for a reason. Right, without further ado, and I am virtually bang on time. Now, Adrian, I do apologise, because you're going to see a photograph of yourself a few years ago, and you'll either be complimented or not. But I want to turn to Adrian Dixon, who is head of operational policy, but is someone we've known for quite some time. I think I started working with him when I became chairman of the forum. So without further ado, Adrian, if you want to unmute yourself, you can carry on.
Thank you, John. Next slide, please, to get off the photo. And then, as John said, I'm Adrian Dixon. I head one of the operational policy teams within HSE's Chemicals Regulation Division. As John also said, I've been around a little while. I've been doing this for 15 years. So it's nice to see some familiar faces and names in the audience. So that's really great. And trying to focus on some of these sort of regulatory issues that the amenity sector has to address. That's brilliant. Next slide, please, John. So what I want to cover in this brief presentation as part of the updating event is the legal framework, the issues around sustainable use, the important bits for the amenity sector, and a little bit around the sort of the future, the National Action Plan. Again, just to give you that context for the discussions that John's going to have, and that you'll no doubt have in your groups as well. Thanks. Next slide. Here is you can click through all the next few things yet. Next, and that, and the one at the right hand side, and then that slide will be done. That's it. Brilliant. So just to save time in transitions, some of you will have seen that slide on many occasions, and apologies for that. It is a bit of an old favourite. Basically, again, those who've been around a bit will remember that in 2009, the whole structure of the pesticide legislation system was changed and basically made to work together. So we've got the pre-marketing phase of pesticides covered by the authorization rules, the use phase covered by sustainable use rules and the machinery rules, and a whole load of stuff around disposal degradation. So that's things like the impact of the Water Framework Directive, the Waste Framework Directive, and the residues and all that sort of thing. So you can see there that the whole stuff, the whole legislative framework fits together. Down the right hand side, of course, and this is where John's mention of the amenity survey comes in. If you want to know whether you're actually achieving a more sustainable use of pesticides, then you have to get some information on how pesticides are being used, what's being used, where it's being used, and you have to keep that information up to date so that you can tell where the issues are. So that's the legislative framework. If you can go on to the next slide, please, John. Now, of course, that legislative framework that I've just described was all very much an EU framework. And as the observant of you will know, we are not in the EU now. So the last year or two has been spent doing an awful lot of work translating the EU legislation into national legislation so that we have a national regime for pesticides. It's important to note that in doing this, the main work was actually just fixing the legislation so that where it referred to EU institutions like the European Food Safety Authority and the European Commission, obviously we don't have access to those bodies. They're not part of the decision-making processes and things. So the main legislative job was to make the legislation work, make it operable in a national setting. And there were an awful lot of legislative changes to that. So the next couple of slides that I'm going to run through are just to give you the titles of the various bits of legislation that you will see referenced in documents or that you might need to look at some point. And unfortunately, there isn't one single bit of legislation that you can look at and read in its entirety. That's not how it works when you're amending great stacks of things. We are trying to put out as much information to make it clear what people should be looking at as possible. And there is work on the government's legislative site, as it were, to try and make these things clearer to follow. But what we do have are a number of statutory instruments, sort of bits of secondary legislation that correct sort of references. So basically the Withdrawal Act of us leaving the EU pulled the EU legislation over into national law. So we still have things like 1107 for authorizations existing, but then all the statutory instruments then make corrections to them to make them operable. So the first one, I won't read all the titles out, but there's one that amends 1107. There's another one that does things in respect of the Sustainable Use Directive so that they link correctly. There's another one on the maximum residue level to correct the 396 of 2005, which is the maximum residue level regulation in the EU, which again has been pulled over. Next slide, please, John. And then we've had further wash up, we call them statutory instruments, because there's obviously bits that get missed or bits that change. The EU was still working, making decisions on active substances, setting maximum residue levels all the time while we were doing this work. So there have been various bits of legislation that have been trying to catch up with some of these things and make sure that they were properly implemented in national law. And of course, we had the various changes around the timing of exit day, which sort of moved once or twice, and how it was referred to. So there's legislative changes for that. And then, of course, the next thing that we had, which is in the third piece of legislation, is the fact that we had the Northern Ireland Protocol agreed as part of the withdrawal agreement. So there is further changes to separate out references to Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and also incorporate some more new EU regulations. Now, obviously, the timing of the last statutory instrument was just before, well, a bit before the end of the transition period that we had. So there will be a further statutory instrument next year to pick up any things that have happened in the EU between that last piece of legislation and the end of the transition period, again, just to make sure that our national law is bang up to date with what happened in the EU right through the transition period. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the statutory instruments. As I say, the references are all there should you need to find them. If you go onto the government's legislation site and type in the SI number, then that would take you to the pieces of legislation should you need to find them. Next slide, please, John. Just to talk a bit about the how things have been developed in the national programme. We've now got a statutory active substance register published on HSE's website to show approved active substances. One of the big changes in moving from an EU system to a national system is that ministers will be making decisions on what active substances are approved, not the EU. So we have to have our own statutory register of active substances that are approved in this country. We're also having to develop a GB review programme for active substances. The EU, we don't have access to the EU programme. You'll have seen that rolling along over the years. So now we have to set up our own programme. And I'll talk a bit about that in more detail shortly. It's important to note that although, as it says in the last bullet point, we've extended all active substance approvals that were due to expire before 2023 for 3 years to give us time to implement this GB review programme, which we're working on. We can review active substance approvals at any time if new evidence arises. So we will be watching what the EU is doing with active substances and then seeing what needs to be done in GB. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're looking at developing we're actively developing a GB active substance review programme. We've obviously got some parameters, criteria, if you like, as to what we want out of a renewals programme. It's obviously got to be effective, manageable and proportionate. And it's got to be efficient without adding resources to other review programmes. I think one thing that you'll have all seen with the EU review programme is that it's ground extremely slowly. There have been extensions and extensions, and it hasn't really been that efficient. It's also worked in a way of just sort of taking things in chronological order rather than actually looking at things across groups of actives, for example, or other ways of looking at things. So what you've found, particularly in agriculture with the EU review programme, is that you may knock off a substance and find you've then a couple of years later reviewing something that's worse than the one that you just knocked off. So we are looking at all these points about whether we can use assessments by other regulators across the world, or whether ministers want to do that more or less, whether we want to do more unilaterally, how we can have a more targeted approach, such as grouping actives for review by class of chemicals or across the legislation. Bearing in mind we do have chemicals in different regimes, and they're all bound by the same classification and labelling legislation as well, or even by function, across crops or sectors or whatever. So there is a piece of work started off on doing that. It's obviously pressing on as a matter of urgency, and we will be seeking views from folks as to, what they want out of such a programme. Next slide, please. Product authorizations, just to give you a bit on that, because many of you will be working at the ground level and wondering what's happening with things that you're using. All the existing authorizations issued in the UK continue to be valid in GB and Northern Ireland. And now that we've finished the transition period, any new authorizations will specify whether they're valid in GB or Northern Ireland only, or both. An important thing for applicants, as in pesticide manufacturers, those applying for authorization, they will require products to be authorized under both regimes, GB and NI, to gain access to both markets. But there will be no changes in data requirements or format for new applications. And applications received before the end of the transition period have been processed as usual, with some exceptions. Next slide, please, John. So here's a bit more detail on that. Where possible, we'll issue a common map number to make it easier for people to see what they're using and have common labelling. However, of course, we may get divergence between GB and Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland will still be in the EU system, and GB will be having its own system. So if active substance expiry dates change, then that could have divergence between the two. If we take a different decision to the EU, or if we make a different decision at a different time, even if it's the same decision, again, there may be differences arising. And if these differences arise and we diverge, then that will impact on conditions of authorizations, data protection periods, and indeed the reference numbers of the products. So there are potential for things to change. Next slide, John. Thank you. So this is just a summary slide. Basically, from the 1st of January, we'll operate a new independent regime. We're taking responsibility for our own decisions. All existing active substance approvals, authorizations and MRLs continue to be available in GB. Active substance approvals due to expire will have been extended for 3 years following an application. We will set MRLs for GB based on our own assessments, but existing maximum residue levels will remain valid until they're amended. And then down at the bottom of that slide, unfortunately, it's just disappeared off the screen. It does say that the Northern Ireland regime continues to follow the EU rules because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. But I've already mentioned that anyway. Next slide, please, John. Thanks. Just to have a few quick words about sustainable use and the National Action Plan. We need to look at sustainable use of pesticides in the context of the various domestic environment strategies. So it's not just DEFRA's 25-year environment plan, there's Wales Natural Resources Policy, and Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own environment strategies. And then, of course, there are bigger plans of domestic carbon net zero targets, biodiversity targets, and all these other things that you'll be reading about, seeing about, and sort of affecting your areas of work. Next slide, please. And what we're trying to do in the sustainable use legislation is trying to get sustainable use of pesticides by reducing the risk and impact of use on health and the environment, and promoting IPM and alternative approaches. And the legislation, and as it's carried over, sets out key areas for national actions. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, given it's an updated event, there are some key requirements that we still have in the sustainable use regulations. People have got to be certified. Certificated is probably a better word rather than certified. You've got to have controls on sales of product. You've got controls in testing on application equipment. Next slide, please. And of course, there are these more sophisticated and difficult things to observe in making sure that you demonstrate due diligence, take reasonable precautions in what you're doing, minimize use where possible, protect the water, and all that entails, and the big issues around IPM, which are difficult to apply in the amenity sector when you're doing a lot of weed control, but there are still things that can be done. Next slide, please. And that's the current National Action Plan, which was published in 2013 and which many of us have had a close involvement in. Next slide, please, John. The priority areas in the National Action Plan then were improving practice in the amateur and amenity sector, enhanced protection of water, and also integrated approaches, stressing the need for integrated approaches. And all of those challenges, I think, have been picked up through the Amenity Forum and taken forward. Next slide, please. But what there is now is a new National Action Plan and a current consultation. Responses are due by the 26th of February. It was published just before Christmas, and it still has very familiar high-level aims in minimising risks and impact, and ensuring that pests and whatever pests are defined as, including weeds, and pesticide and weed resistance are managed effectively. And it sets out a number of key goals so that we'll still have robust regulation, that will support the development and uptake of IPM, that will still use pesticides safely and sustainably, that will reduce risks and improve metrics and indicators. Again, John's reference to the survey, and will ensure that government works effectively with others to develop the goals of the National Action Plan. It's a UK-wide plan which has been developed in conjunction with all 4 administrations, so it's not an England-only plan, it's very much a UK-wide plan, and it's been developed to apply to all pesticide users. Next slide, please. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through things, just to give you the current policy context, challenges, and those are my details, many of which you'll have seen before. So on that note, thank you for your attention. I look forward to listening to the rest of the updating event. Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian. And I really do thank you for your time. And there was an awful lot of information in those slides, which I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to ask questions on. We will try to have a question time session within here. And also, I would suggest that if you want to email us any questions, if we don't cover them, I know that Adrian will look at those and try and do his best to respond, or we can put general responses through our website. But thank you, Adrian. That's really, really helpful indeed. So what I want to do is to sort of move on from that, but not move on, because my presentation is very much focused on the consultation on the new plan. There's a lot of busy slides for me, and so I've put some of the key words in bold. And as I say, these presentations will go out again, but I wanted to go through some of the themes there and give how the sector might be responding. Obviously, the forum is putting a response in by the due date of February the 22nd, I think. But essentially, we're encouraging other organisations to as well. And I have circulated round our draft response, and I am discussing it with other groups like the VI and all sorts of people to make sure that we try to focus on some of the common messages. So, as Adrian says, basically, surprise, surprise, front and centre is integrated pest management and sustainability. You'd expect that. It does say crop protection, of course, because even though I keep on talking to DEFRA, I keep telling them that we don't grow crops, but there they go. But it, as also Adrian said, it's important to recognise it is a UK plan. Now, that's actually causing some complications as well, because we all know that individual governments have now have got rather a bit more independence than they used to have. So, of course, they're feeding in quite vigorously into that debate. So I've also got quite good discussions going on with each of the governments. That slide just literally, to me, brings out some of the priorities within the plan for where we're coming from. So obviously this reducing the reliance on plant protection products. Now, a lot of people then say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean we can't use PPPs? Of course it doesn't, but it says it's about targeting, it's about minimizing use, and actually putting it in an integrated plan. Obviously, you'd expect the other ones to be there, but also, basically environmental protection. And I think Adrian mentioned in his presentation the carbon agenda. And I think that's quite important, that when environment isn't just about protecting the environment in the traditional sense. It's also about how do we minimize carbon emissions and the things that go with that. And then obviously some of the key government priorities, public money for public goods. Again, the last 12 months have sort of slightly put the Chancellor off track in terms of some of his budget calculations, but it is very much there. Environmental protection, sustainability, health and safety. And of course, the government is also very keen to see productivity increases within our sector, within the industry. And of course, economic recovery. And that's going to be a biggie as we go forward. So, as Adrian said, they are the national action, the new consultation document, those are the sort of 5 key areas. And what I want to do is just look at each of those areas in relation to our sector and see how we might be responding to them. So the first one was ensure continued robust regulation to protect our health and environment. And there's a number of key things within the document. It's quite a hefty document. It's not as hefty as the last Council draft National Action Plan. I used to use that when I couldn't sleep on a night because I used to start to read it and then I knew I could nod off at some point. This is slightly more easier to read, but obviously, as Adrian said, I'm reinforcing some of the messages. They want the system for regulation in relation to pesticides to be simpler for users. There's the word innovation. There's mention of biopesticides, which is a hot topic within the amenity sector, and these IPM approaches. Now, again, I'm repeating what Adrian has said here, but it is worth repeating. And I think you go onto the website, as Adrian said. If you go on the website, it's all there. And I think it's quite important for you to read through that. Adrian mentioned it, and I think it is, because essentially the one in bold there is something I'm asked for all the time. And I know Adrian said it. I think he said it once or twice. I'll say it again. Active substance approvals are due to expire before 2023, will be extended for 3 years. And unless, as Adrian said, something untoward happened that we didn't know about. So that does mean, following departure from the EU, approval for glyphosate, which had an expiry date of the 15th December, has been extended until at least December 2025 in Great Britain. So it's really quite important to sort of just emphasise that because a number of people there. Now, author Adrian again has talked about the approval process. So what is our response? Now, obviously, I've tried to pull together something that's concise when I've responded to the consultation, but we do agree that there needs to be a rigorous and robust regulatory system. So, I mean, I don't think we could not agree to that. We'd also agree that it should be a process based upon understanding the science. And we all know in recent years, the EU system has become rather over-political in terms of decision-making. And in implementing the regulatory system, key to us is that when decisions are made to withdraw an active or a product, the process needs to consider the unintended consequences. Now, I think this is quite important. Very often when we look, and we all know there have been products withdrawn, particularly in turf, which have left us with nothing in the cupboard, basically. And I think that there needs to be a rather more understanding approach, perhaps a longer period of stewardship to allow people to adapt. Because if you don't give that period of adaptation, people will do things that they perhaps should not do. So I think we're quite keen that people realise, you know, it's things like internet products which shouldn't be used, that people will be very tempted to use if that period of time is not long enough. We also, of course, would support the concept of simplifying the system to address the ever-escalating costs of approvals and review. Obviously, everybody always wants better communication. And that one at the bottom is really important, I think. We must review all life cycle consequences about when you're looking at other alternatives. Now, the reason for that is, I think, is that it's very easy for people to say, well, okay, don't use that. Use this particular non-chemical approach. But if you analyse maybe the diesel usage or other things, the carbon footprint of that can be considerably higher. So we do think it's quite important. I'm grateful to Peter Corbett from Rigby Taylor, who pulled some work together from the Netherlands. And in fact, we will be for that, because that's quite important when you're looking at these various ways that they do take all the life cycle consequences. And that might mean that a PPP is a far better product to use in terms of when you look at it in the complete life cycle. Biopesticides, the development of biocontrols has enormous potential, as we know. We've spoken about this in terms of some of our conferences. But again, all we'd say is just to ensure when we look at these that basically there's no unintended consequences. And the current regulatory system can create a rather grey area when it comes to some of these products. These products might well be produced for a particular reason, but they may have a side reason, which is as a plant, they do some plant protection product activity, but they're not there for that reason. So when they go to CRD or others, they may well, from a chemical composition, meet the requirement. But then they'll say, but of course, they're not used, are they, for that particular purpose? Well, they are. So they should really come under PPP regulations. Not that I'm speaking against them, but it's a grey area at the moment. And I think it's an area that needs attention. And I've actually already raised the discussion with Adrian and his team, and we are looking at that, because all we want to do is ensure that actually what is happening is a level playing field. And that's not arguing for pesticides or against, it's just saying that I think it is a grey area that needs to be addressed in terms of looking at that. And I think the other thing, of course, is that people realise, in DEFRA and otherwise, that biopesticides may well offer a great alternative, but again, it needs to be a managed process, because it's not that easy to move people that way. Now, this is a very busy slide, but again, it was some of the things that we will pull out in our response. We do support the commitment to further developing scientific research. We would hope that amenity would not be left out in that particular discussion. I think part of the trouble sometimes is that there's a strong focus on agriculture, and then say, well, it must apply to amenity. So we support that as long as it's got some funding to go with it. Stewardship. Our members have often brought to my attention and the forum's attention this issue that in amenity, often additional requirements seem to be imposed as add-ons. And again, it's this sort of focus, if you're not careful, of and everything in my friends in agriculture, and then saying, well, actually, we need to do something extra for amenity. Whereas actually, if we look at it in an amenity sense, it might be that we ought to look at it in a different way. And these additional registration requirements that occur. Now, we can pull some of these out in questions if you like, but these are some of the responses that we're currently making. Now, that was quick, but it was bound to be quick because I'm just trying to pull the main points. Support the development and uptake of integrated pest management. IPM is front and center. It was there in the original action plan. It's there in the new plan. And they, if you pull out some of their words, will work with stakeholders to ensure all users will have access to the information support they need to integrate IPM approaches. Will support the development of IPM approaches which provide maximum opportunity to protect or enhance the environment. And again, that word, whilst maintaining crop protection. And again, I will get them to recognise that sometimes the language they use is still too focused on agriculture. That doesn't mean it's not important. It is. It's very important because it uses 90%. But it's important when you're communicating with amenity people, we talk the right language. Now, they put that slide in the or that triangle in their document, and I don't like it basically, because it tends to be indicating that you go up the triangle, and then if everything else fails, you use chemicals. And again, I don't like the word chemical because we're all made up of chemicals. Everything we do in life is chemicals, and it tends to say these are very bad. And I think the other thing that I sometimes, and there are people in DEFRA who will know that say John's been talking to you, because they do tend to say alternatives. Integrated is not about alternatives. Integrated is about that kind of diagram. It's about saying, when we have a particular issue around pests, weeds, and diseases, we need to plan and look at all the alternatives that are available. Cultural, plant protection product, everything else. And then bring out a plan which actually addresses that, which it's the target of minimization, I realize that. But there does tend to be this sort of idea that it's either using plant protection products or using alternatives, and integrated is not about that. I think the other thing that I would pick up as well, and I think Adrian sort of tended to say, and I will disagree with him on this, I think Amenity has been involved with integrated pest management for longer than most people think. I think one of the things that DEFRA are currently doing is they've got a project on which they've appointed ADAS to do, and they are going to have an amenity work group. And it is quite interesting talking to the consultant who came from a view when she started the conversation with me that, IPM wasn't anywhere in amenity. And at the end, she was saying, actually, you're doing this before I knew you were doing it. So I think it's really quite important. Do go on to our contact Kate, because we already have some documents. We got some funding a year and a half ago. I think it's smashing guidance and integrated plan. If you're a member, it's completely free. If you're not a member, it's a very small charge. If you contact Kate, because she'll give you a password and you can access it. And again, this is something that in my discussions with DEFRA, they were really quite impressed with in relation to what we already had. In terms of our response, we would support continuing professional development. And the biggie, as far as we're concerned, is that we feel the amenity standard should become a requirement. And I've been talking to my agricultural friends and other people in the industries, saying to them, this is an absolutely vital part. And we'll talk about the amenity standard later on, but essentially the amenity standard demonstrates to everybody that you are part of a recognised assurance scheme, you're operating at professional standards. And I think it's a game changer in the sector. And if nothing else comes out of the new National Action Plan, I want this to be in there as a requirement. I know it would involve legislation. I know all the issues that people will tell me, but I think it would be a game changer in terms of our sector. They talk a bit about advice, and I think one of the things that is a bit of a challenge to us, because obviously in agriculture there tends to be advisors who then specify for the operator, and it's all part of the sort of assured scheme. As we all know, in amenity that can be very different. A local authority appoints a contractor. The contractor gives the guidance as well as doing the operation. So there's some things to think through there that we need to there. Again, in that response, I've mentioned the carbon footprint, because again, I'm very keen on showing that actually it's something that we are conscious of as well, and about the communications. So we do agree, and it says in the document, there should be some kind of financial support scheme for such bodies as local authorities, because if you want local authorities, and we've got lots of local authority members, to respond to this agenda, they're under enormous pressures. And when it comes to procurement of systems, costs can be quite a big factor. So if we're going to get this change in culture, we need to move it forward in that way. So we would suggest, and the first one will not be a surprise to anybody, but I think we need to build on the success of the forum. I think the forum and this is, I know I'm sort of biased because I've been involved with it, but essentially I think it has made a mega change in people's views, and we need everybody to get behind it, because I think, I hear people say the dangers going forward is, will we still be able to use plant protection products in Amenity or whatever? One key way to get that is to work together and to commit yourself to best practice. Introduce the Amenity standard as a requirement, and we do agree there should be better enforcement. Now, I'm sure Adrian might smile at this point because he'll say, well, give me the resources. But the reality is we do need better enforcement, because there is a view outside those who don't get involved with the forum who say, well, why should I anyway? Because nobody does anything about it. Now, I don't think that's right, because they do if they report it. But the reality is we do think there should be more enforcement there. The next third one was ensure those who use plant protection products do so safely and sustainably. Now, again, I know I'm going through this quite quickly, but if we just focus on the highlighted ones, there again, it's, we believe we need to enhance the system in enforcement. I was talking to somebody in DEFRA about this. They said, surely if you're talking with the sector, you don't want more enforcement. And I said, actually, those people who are supporting the forum are doing the job right anyway, and therefore, why should they be fear better enforcement? And there is this tricky issue about regulation, about point of sale. I could spend quite a bit of time talking around this, but I do think it needs re-looking at, because currently the regulations, as you know, is if you buy, you're the person who gives the assurance it will be used by somebody who is suitably trained. And again, do we need to sort of look at that? Should there be an onus on the person selling? I don't know. It needs to be looked through. And I think the same thing applies for amateur. And I'm not attacking amateur. We've got members of the forum now from the AM. We've done an awful lot of work, but I do think it is still a bit of a neglected area. If I go to my local garden centre and I say to them, can somebody give me some advice on whether I should use this product? They very often will say, well, actually, yes, we've got somebody in head office, so we can get him or her on the phone. Is that adequate? Should I, if I'm buying Roundup from the shelf, should I effectively have some kind of check on me that somebody asks, do I know what I'm buying? I don't know. Again, it's an area that we think needs further discussion. So, stronger and more responsive enforcement, and we must look at all aspects is the sort of area that I'm coming through with that. Communication. Communication is always an issue, and it's in the consultation document. They talk about communication. There's the consultation of those within the sector, there's the public, and those who do not sit within the sector but can often make ultimate decisions. My local MP, for example, who now knows an awful lot more about Amenity than he did 10 years ago. But essentially, I think I would like to see better partnership working amongst all the groups, whether it be, and I've started a discussion with the Voluntary Initiative and others, but also to try and to do we could do so much more if we all work together in communicating some of these things. Now, as far as we're concerned, we for some time have recognised that raising public awareness is a very important element. We established the Get Moving site some while ago. We have upgraded the Get Moving site quite a lot. There's some video clips in there in terms of doing it, but it's all very focused on understanding, getting the public understanding. And more recently, with again some support from members, we're launching we've launched a campaign, and we're working with the general media to try and do that. For example, in Cambridgeshire currently at the minute, there was on radio, on whatever, BBC, Cambridge or whatever, a mention of it the other day. I think it's really important that we get this public access. And I know Lawrence is on the line, but we had this great idea in July to have sort of, if you like, a Celebrate Amenity week where we're going to encourage organisations for charity, and we got Perennial on board. Obviously, that didn't happen, but it will happen, and we will move that forward later on. In terms of the sector itself, let's be proud of the sector itself. Again, I know this is a slide you've seen before, but I can't help but repeat it. And do come together. The way really to influence policymakers is through the Amenity Forum. And I said, this is one of the things that's been interesting to me, that I lost. The policy bit, if you like, of this new plan went to DEFRA from CRD. So I had to create a whole new set of contacts in DEFRA. But what was being really helpful, it's been powerful, because by saying if you talk to the Amenity Forum, you are talking to the sector, and we can get some responses there. So really, if you're not already a supporter of the forum, I really ask you to. If you're an organisation, we ask for a contribution of £600 a year. If you're a local authority, it's absolutely free at the minute. So please do come on board. We give you lots of information and guidance, but it's equally, it also demonstrates we're all working together in the one direction. And I've mentioned the Amenity Standard. That to me is the key. And I live for the day when basically, if you come to do a lawn or if you come to do a contracting job, you are asked to produce the Amenity Standard card to demonstrate that you operate to professional standards. So we do think in terms of our response, we strengthen obligations on sellers. We've talked about that. We've really talked about all of those as I've gone through. CPD is an interesting one. Obviously, at the moment, all we need is a legal requirement is for an operator certificate. We do have people members of the Amenity Register, but not as many as we should have. And again, there's work to do there. Should CPD become a requirement? Maybe you can talk about that in your groups. Should it be there as a required? If you're a member of the Amenity if you're an Amenity Standard, you almost certainly have got to demonstrate you're doing CPD. But again, should there be more onus or requirement for it? And I've mentioned the Amenity Standard. We do believe a campaign, and again, you'll see a lot of these messages I'm repeating, but when you respond to consultations, somebody once told me, you say it once, you say it twice, and say it again. We believe a targeted campaign of inspection and enforcement. In Ireland, I know for a fact a couple of years ago, they actually targeted 2 or 3 organisations. Now, again, I don't want to be in the invidious position of doing that, but they did. And they went, and actually they found that none of those had got their sprayers tested. Overnight, the applications for sprayer testing in Ireland shot through the roof. And I think it's really important. Sprayer testing, we stressed that. We said everybody must test their sprayer if it's over 5 years old, blah, blah, blah. But then I do get people who go, well, nobody seems to check. And I think, again, we need to consider how we can work with the authorities to see whether we can ensure that something happened there. Because the numbers of sprayer tests have gone down. We can, when I'm talking to government, I tell them that's because, everybody's had them and there's another period. The reality is there are still sprayers out there that should be tested that are not. Again, I've talked about the retail. And I think the local amenity scheme for householders is still got legs. I'm a allotment holder, chairman of my allotment association. What a job. But the reality is I know what lurks in sheds. I know what lurks around. I know how people dispose of those plastic containers in the way they shouldn't do. Then we come to setting targets to support reduction of risk. This will be fairly short, but again, it is important. We will, in our response, indicate to them that we agree there should be improved metrics. But again, can we make sure that that is in the language of amenity and it actually is something that we can get behind? Because quite a lot of the metrics currently are fine, but the way they're reported, and I get them, is very difficult to interpret in an amenity context. And I think it's very important we do that. I think we've moved light years from where I first started, where everybody blamed each other. The farmers used to blame amenity used to blame amateur, and vice versa. But I think the reality is, I think better metrics would be welcomed, actually. But I think it's about putting them in the right context rather than the context of there. So you gather from what we're saying, I don't think the amenity sector is up for better analysis and a lot more scrutiny in terms of what it does. Research and development, there is quite a lot of research out there. I've had the privilege of going to places like Gillett's Hill and others and seeing wonderful innovation research going on. But again, do we actually pull that together in a sort of an amenity context? People at the STRI are doing wonderful jobs. But again, when I was chair of the Pesticides Forum a year or so ago, we did actually set a small subgroup up to look at doing that. Now, I think we need, again, to focus our minds around that. And if you're going to want to actually reduce PPPs in amenity, perhaps the authorities need to support and fund some proper research so we can actually, again, find ways of getting to that. And then ensure effective work with others to deliver the goals. I think that is really important. And again, as I've said to you already, I've been in discussions with NFUs, AICs, people who you might say, well, why are you talking to them? Because I think it's really important that we bring this partnership approach and work together in the right way as we can. There is a DEFRA-funded IPM project, as I think I said, with ADAS as the consultants. I did send round to all our members information on it. They are still looking for amenity people, organisations who might want to take part in that focus group discussion. Thank you to those who've already volunteered. So if you are free for an hour or so on those dates under those categories, please can you let Kate know if you haven't had the members email, because that's got a link in it. But if you let Kate know, who we can then refer you on to the email address of the people who are doing it. Really, really important we get an amenity voice in that. And I don't want to scaremonger here, but I'm going to. There is a well-known lobby group that exists in this country who are very against the use of pesticides. And they've got quite a targeted campaign going at the minute, particularly around amenity and local authorities. And they probably will have a voice at that one of those groups. So I think it really is important that we get there and present the views that we have. So I've rattled through that as I always do. I know I rattled through very quickly, but I hope out of that you've seen there is change. There's quite a lot of change, and I'm surprised Adrian's hair's not even grayer or whiter, because basically I know he's having to deal with a lot of that change, new staff, new approaches. There's a lot going on around change. There's a lot of challenge, and I know, I get contractors who contact me and say, I've had another freedom of information request, blah, blah, blah. I know about that kind of thing. But I do think there's opportunity, because I think we are in a strong position as a sector. I think we've come a long way, but we've now got to build on that. So we will put our response in by the 22nd of February, but equally, I hope other organisations will too. If they could share those responses with me, that would be brilliant. And the two things I want to make sure you put in is amenity standard as a requirement and greater enforcement. That would be good. I think what we want to try and do now is to have some more general questions or discussion. Now, I think, Kate, if the best thing to do is for them to hold their hands up, is it, or what have you?
Yeah, I can't see everybody because not everybody's got their camera on.
No,
but if
so
you want to say something,
on the screen, you can put your hand up, can't you?
Yeah, they can get it to work.
Okay. Well, shout out then if you want. Who wants to start, basically? Is somebody want to start off with a question to Adrian or myself? And I'll get Kate, if she doesn't mind, to keep an eye on people that are coming through. Kate, have you seen? Oh, Chris, I think was one. Chris Perry, yeah?
I was just saying, I'm mucking about with my screen. I haven't got a question. Sorry.
Oh, right, sorry.
But to be honest, I think there should be more. Someone has mentioned in our group more of a database for refresher training, and people who have had certificates for a long time who have not had refresher training, then there should be some kind of database to inform people that there's a requirement. We do all get complacent. We do make so you just got to be aware of that. I was saying in our little group that we were, I've had my training certificates since 1998, and it was, and I'm practicing groundsman, and it's only until recently I've been doing some refresher training. But it's never, you never think about it. You just carry it, and the legislation and I've always read up about legislation and stuff, but it's handy to go on these refresher training, because what I learned years ago is a little bit different to what is being practiced now by trainers.
Yeah, so I mean, I think just a little anecdote. I remember doing a question time at Saltex a few years ago, and a guy at the back stood up and said, well, I think, I don't really need to know all this. And I said, can I just ask, are you qualified? And he said, yes, I've got I got the PA certificate or the City and Guild certificate. I said, how long ago? He said, 30 years ago. I said, have you done anything else since? He said, not at all. So I think, I mean, it's an interesting one, because you've raised whether CPD ought to be there, maybe build that even stronger into the standard. I don't know whether Adrian's got a view. They're talking there, Adrian, about a sort of better database of it or whatever. Have you got a thought on this?
I mean, I think the National Action Plan consultation does ask some questions around the whole sort of training and certification area, and I'd encourage people to look at that. I think, like you say, it is difficult. I mean, we work closely with all the training organisations, and I see David sitting there on screen amongst others. It's nice to see him again. And I think that link is vital in ensuring that the training organisations do have the relevant, up-to-date regulatory information. But then, how that translates and gets into people. I mean, another example, a bit like you're saying, John. I mean, I often think with driving and things like that, people need some CPD, because to my shame, I was on a speed awareness course a couple of years ago and found out some things that, I didn't know changed, So I think it is a continuing question across a number of areas, of how, what's the best way of getting people to keep up to date, and particularly in this sort of serious area. So, yeah, I'd encourage folks to particularly look at that bit in the consultation document. Thanks.
David Fisher from Lantra. I mean, hopefully Lantra are making a response to the consultation as well. I mean, what's your thoughts around CPD?
I mean, I think it is obviously something that, well, we're very much supportive of the CPD aspect, and there are courses available that people can do. I think like a general thing with this is always that it's as it stands, it's more of the nice to have, obviously, than anything that's mandated or enforceable. I think the people that we see who often engage with it, and rightly so, may be doing so for their own CPD, and maybe from a contractor's point of view, they're doing so, to get one up on the competition. Really, it might be that by having your workforce qualified, or having refresher training certificates, you can show that your guys are obviously very much up to speed, and it might be the thing that gets you a contract over the next company that hasn't. So, it's obviously we very much encourage it, and that, courses are available for that. It would be great if there was more of a legislative kind of push behind that, I think. And as we've said maybe before, is the forum, it's the people outside of the forum that we're trying to maybe bring up to speed with the forum that has always been supportive of getting people trained and certificated regularly.
On the chat function, Peter's put about it. He says it's so difficult to compare and contrast all the various methods of non-chemical and chemical methods when you're sort of weighing all these carbon costs and everything else. And again, I don't know whether anybody's got a comment on that. I mean, people who in the distributors section, I don't know if there's anybody on the call here, but basically, how do you sort of talk to your customers about integrated approaches, or are you just selling your product, as it were? Any thoughts around that?
I think Jim Glaister was probably going to speak on the previous bit about CPD.
Oh, Jim.
Because I noticed Jim kept waving.
Sorry, Jim, I missed you out. I'm sorry, I can't see everybody on the screen, so it's like a lottery here. Jim.
Well, I thought we'd kind of come to a point where we were going to raise another question, so I was about to raise, another point. It's just in our group, one of the things that we talked about, one of the big challenges that we've got across the entire amenity sector is taking control of public perception. How do we take control of social media? How do we take control of the misinformation and the sensationalism on social media? And the reason I mention it is just because I've got this opportunity to say this directly to you, Adrian. One of the things that was brought up by one of the members in the group is that the HSE website has got a really lovely kind of part of the website, which is all about sort of frequently asked questions about glyphosate, which is great. But if you look at the date on it, it was updated quite a long time ago, which might actually erode some confidence from people looking at it. So having stuff like that regularly updated on the HSE website can help. At least it's something that you can push people towards. If they see a recent updating date on it, then it gives people a bit more confidence. But that was just kind of a general thing I wanted to throw open. How do we do that? How do we take control of public perception? Because that's the pressure that our local authorities are under from the public, who are getting this stuff from, as we know, completely political and emotional arguments rather than the science.
Well, I'll let Adrian respond to the bit on there, and then I'll come in with my bit. But Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point about the stuff on the website. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of stuff on there, and we've actually been focusing on the EU exit related stuff anyway, and some of the other stuff. I mean, you could argue that if it's on there and it has an old date on it, may well still be right, even if we just went in and changed the date. So I think that I'll take your point entirely, Jim, and we'll try and pick that up where we can. I mean, I think the wider point about sort of addressing public perception is always going to be a difficult one. And in our group, the glyphosate issue was raised sort of from a number of perspectives, both from a point of view of the local authorities getting the FOI requests, and also from the contractors who are getting sort of strange specification in contracts. Again, we don't want you using glyphosate. Well, what else do you want us to use? And what are the implications of using other things, particularly as we said in terms of carbon footprint? So I think it's just one way you have to keep trying to get the message out there, and try and be as neutral as you can in responding. I think, but that would be my perspective. Thanks, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tried to raise it in there. I mean, I absolutely agree. I think the public message is the real thing that is really important. And I mean, we get things right, we get things wrong. We did launch a Get Moving site, and I realised that what we got slightly wrong there was we got the site, but then didn't actually work through how we get people to go to it and part of it. So one of the things we've done with public now, in fact, with consent of the forum, we've put some resource into this. And what we're trying to do is get that link up now, not with our friends in the media, people like Lawrence and others who are fantastic, really are fantastic, but basically getting to people in the wider media and focusing on where we are with it. And so therefore, some of the things we're doing now, we're really simplifying some of the messaging, but actually trying to get the public and you know, I think we can get it to work. We're working currently with an authority who are quite keen on the concept of the amenity standard, and obviously, could they get to the point where, as I say, they can say as an authority, we only use people who actually operate at an amenity standard, and we are very proud of it. Now, I know they've got cost pressures, but I think we are trying very hard. But it's a message to all of you, really. We are quite good at talking to ourselves, and we really need to talk to the wider community, because what we do is really important. And I don't want to see a situation arise where we lose the ability to do a lot of it, and then there's a big outcry because the amenity spaces are terrible. We've got to drive the agenda, I think, as somebody said. Now, there is an ability if you take participants to put your hand up, and Carl Smith has put his hand up. So, Carl.
It was relating to the training that Chris mentioned. Basis do and the Rosso do something to refresher training for quite a few people. You know, they ran it a few years ago. I don't know if they still are. I don't think enough people took it on board, but they do training courses for people that have had training previously.
Anybody want to respond to that? Or Al Mason has his hand up. I think he has anyway. If he hasn't, he's got it now.
Yeah, I went on the same course as Carl a couple of years ago with Basis, doing a sort of like a refresher training for pesticide applicators. It's obviously not been able to take off recently for COVID reasons. I would have thought it's difficult to get people together and in a classroom and talk through the options, but that's available, and we can, you know. We will be looking to do that. But I suppose the point to make is that very few people ask us for that. You know, we could do that. That would be an advantage to us because we're training our guys up to do it. But most of our clients, local authorities, would not be asking us for that kind of, that kind of training. They wouldn't be looking at that. So that's something to bear in mind. It needs to be promoted.
And I think, Al, you've come under quite a bit of pressure recently from the anti-groups, and I don't know whether you want to say anything about that, or I'd prefer not to.
There's an awful lot of talk. I live down in the southwest, so there's quite a lot of green points of view down here, and obviously we come across lots of people, and within our group there was Annie Tollerfield who raised this. She works for English Heritage, and she was saying that they're getting pressure not to use glyphosate on their sites, and we get the same sort of public perception that glyphosate is carcinogenic. And what they don't, they look at the IARC classification, and they look at the Californian case, and they don't look beyond that. And obviously anti-people don't publicize beyond that. But when there's a genetic literacy publication that sort of talks about the fact that IARC is the only sort of official body in the world that believes that glyphosate is carcinogenic.
Yeah.
All the registration authorities have stated that it isn't. In fact, Bayer won a case in California against the state of California, saying they don't have to put it on their label because there is no proof that it's carcinogenic. And we need to be able to get that information out. I can say it to somebody who challenges me in the street, and Annie can say it to somebody who challenges it about glyphosate use and an English heritage site. But members of the public assume that we just say it because we use the product.
Yeah.
And that it's trying to get that credible response, because members of the public think that what they know is gospel.
Yeah.
We're just making up to make our lives easier.
Right. I mean, doesn't it again emphasise we've got to actually we've got to really focus on getting our message out. Really, we really have. I've got some Lawrence Gale put his hand. I think it's going to have to be the last one because some of you will be wanting a natural break. So Lawrence.
Just backing up what that chap has just said, it's I think Bayer and Syngenta and all the big boys, Monsanto and all the ones who've made these chemicals over 10, 15 years, and they're safe and they've got all the documentation. Well, they perhaps should be doing more to portray the safeness of those products through the general public. Really, I don't see a lot of that, which maybe would help the cause really, because that's the way I see it, really, personally.
I think Jim has put his hand up.
It's kind of going back on Al's point there. The problem is if Bayer say, no, our product is safe, then the public go, well, of course you're going to say that.
Yeah.
I think we do need it to be, I mean, there are all these scientific studies, all of these independent scientific studies, but they all get buried.
Yeah.
And I think, and actually Bayer have done something quite unique. They've collected together all of these studies and they are available to download from their website. It's a really good step, but actually persuading people to go over there and find them and read those studies, that's the difficulty.
Okay, well, there are still a number of, like all these things, once you're slow to start, but then there's lots of people who want to say things. But again, we'll pick those up on the chat function, because I do want to give people a short break. But I just saw there was one there. Somebody was still checking on the glyphosate statement. I think both Adrian and I said it in terms of the extension of the approval, and that is exactly correct. Somebody said, is this correct, that it can carry, and it can until those dates that we put there. That's right, isn't it, Adrian? Glyphosate is okay it's been extended for 3 years, provided nothing untoward happens.
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's the thing with all the approvals. They're extended unless there is something happens or some information comes to light. So if somebody else takes a decision elsewhere in the world or whatever, then, we might look at it, for any of the actives. But yeah, thanks, John.
Okay. Right. Now, please don't disappear. Our host organisation, there is a really interesting presentation going to be made. So I'm going to suggest we're going to be a bit late starting it. Perhaps we could have sort of 10 minutes to people to get up from their chairs, stretch their legs or whatever, and we'll start just after 5 past. We'll come back. Is that all right? Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for inviting us here today. So thanks to John and thanks to Kate, and obviously Green Tech, our event sponsor. So we're just talking a little bit about wildflowers today and how that fits in with some of the things that we're talking about. Is biodiversity obviously very high on the bill when it comes to various things that people are talking about. So just going to talk a little bit about how the two things are linked, and if there's any questions at the end, I'm not sure if we'll be fielding them today. We'll certainly deal with them and can get back to people if anyone has any queries. So we'll just start running through, keep it as short as we can. So I'm Stuart, and I look after the wildflower side of the business here at John Chambers, which is part of Green Tech. Some of you might be aware of the name John Chambers already. It's a name which goes back. John was involved in the inception of the native wildflower seed industry back in the 1970s, became very much aware of what was going on with regards to losing species, both flora and fauna. Already involved in the grass seed industry, he decided, and along with some of his colleagues, to turn that into a more commercial side of things and start to help to reintroduce habitat and hopefully save some species. So as I say, I work for Green Tech. We've got the in-house seed business now. So John Chambers retired in 2013. Green Tech had been dealing with John for many years, getting on for 20 years, and acquired the business when John retired. So Green Tech will need no introduction, I'm sure, to most of you. Be aware of what Green Tech do, and that's just a list of some of the things that we're talking about, one of which is the wildflower side of it. So this is a statistic which a lot of you will have seen in various guises, in various places. So news reports, online publications. We have lost in this country somewhere between 97 and 99% of our native wildflower meadows, depending where you read it. That's happened for many, many different reasons. We are looking at the development after the World Wars. So we're talking about food production, we're talking about housing, redevelopment of business and commercial uses. So there's lots of different reasons, but we have lost all of that land that was originally wildflower meadows. So we're looking to see what we can reintroduce, and it is a very big part of any kind of planning scheme that goes on now. Obvious statement at the top there: wildlife needs wildflowers. So it makes perfect sense that that would be the case. But just to explain a little bit of that, a lot of our pollinators, which we are reliant on for food production and to keep the species going, are particularly reliant on one or two very small numbers of particular plants. So they will pick out that plant, they will lay their eggs, the eggs will hatch, and the young actually feed on the plant before going through the cycle, becoming an adult, and then starting the cycle again. So what we're looking at there is, for example, the common blue butterfly, just to pick one out, and they've got this relationship with trefoil, so bird's foot trefoil. They will lay the eggs on the plant, the caterpillars will hatch, they will eat from that plant there until they reach a sufficient size. They will then move into the chrysalis stage, and after time, they'll emerge as an adult butterfly, and then the whole thing starts again, and they'll lay their eggs on the same kind of plant. So if trefoil isn't available in that particular area, that habitat, then nor will the blue butterfly in this case. And this goes right the way through the animal kingdom when it comes to the pollinators and insects. So we're looking at other different examples, would be the orange-tipped butterfly. We see that in the gardens in the summer, late spring, summer. That has a similar relationship with hedge garlic. If it's not there, then the butterfly will struggle. And then we've also got similar things with some of the white butterflies and ragged robin, which that's the ragged robin flower on the left there. So we have got in the UK hundreds of different bee types. We have got, I think it's in the region of 300 different solitary bees. We've got 30, 40 plus different bumblebees. However, we have only got the one honeybee, and the honeybee that we have is the European honeybee. So the thing about the honeybee, why I've mentioned it here, is that it has a particularly short tongue. It's proboscis. So what that needs is some particularly open flowers, which are very easy to get into for the nectar, and then to obviously pick up the pollen, go away and do its pollinating. With a lot of the other bees, we see different kinds of tongues. So we've got a lot of bumblebees that have got a particularly long proboscis. They can actually get into more tubular shaped flowers to get to the parts that they need to. What we try to do is to make sure that we're catering when we put together a wildflower seed mix, catering for lots of different types of pollinators. So we're going to have some that have short tongues, we're going to have some that have long tongues, and we need to try and make sure that we're catering for all of those. So that's just a shot of a small corner of our seed mixing unit. What we've done here is just trying to explain how we actually put the mixes together, basically. So we've said that we need to have lots of different types of flowers. That goes for the plants themselves as well. So different heights, different forms. And sometimes there's 20 or 30 different seeds in a mix. So we need to make sure we've got the right things in there. the way that we actually have to formulate the mixes is to make sure that we've got, ideally, roughly the same amount of seeds per species. So to break that down in the most simplest way that I could think of, the picture on the left-hand side is the common poppy seed. What you've got there is potentially up to 10,000 seeds per gram. And then over on the right-hand side, we've got corn cockle, which is maybe 40 or 50 grams, 40 or 50 seeds per gram, sorry. So big differences there. If I were to make 1 kilogram of seed mix made up of 500 grams of each, I've got millions times more poppy seeds than I have corn cockle. So when they actually try to grow in a field, in a flower bed, you are going to have lots and lots of poppy seeds germinating, establishing, and you're very unlikely to actually see a corn cockle because they'll be completely outcompeted. So if you scale that up to a seed mix that's got maybe 20 or 30 different seed types in there, we've got to do a lot of formulations, get the calculations right so that we're putting the right amount of seeds in. So that's just a little bit of an insight into what's going on there and how we put the mixes together. A little bit about the different types of seed mixes. So an 80% grass, 20% wildflower seed mix, 80-20 mix. A lot of you will be familiar with this. This is what's known as a meadow mix. So the end result, once everything has established, is something that resembles a meadow and is helping to create new habitat for all those pollinators. And obviously, it's quite easy on the eye once it actually gets going as well. So really popular type of mix. Can take 2 or 3 years to establish. So we're always keen to make sure that everyone realizes it's not a straightforward solution when you look at this kind of mix. Sowing rate, actually only 5 grams a square meter. Now, a lot of people on here will be used to sowing grass seed mixes, but not necessarily wildflower. Grass seed might be 40, 50 grams a square meter. So you've got a good handful of seed there. With wildflower, much smaller seeds. So the sowing rate is much less. You wouldn't want to increase that sowing rate either. But it's a bit of a false economy because you'd actually be creating more competition and you'd end up with a pretty poor area, to be perfectly honest. So where some people might think, oh, I'll make it green up a little bit quickly to start with. We'll put 10 grams down. No, stick to 5 and then you'll get the best results. We've also got 100% wildflower seed mixes. So what we've got here is no grasses in the mix at all. It's just pure wildflower. That is good for making sure that you get some good results a bit quicker. And also it's a slightly different look because you haven't got the grasses in there. So it's good in a domestic situation or somewhere that needs a bit more impact. A lot quicker to establish, less maintenance involved. You haven't got to keep on top of the grasses. So it's quite good for areas where you've got bare soil. It might be a flower bed, planters, anything like that. And the sowing rate is a lot less. It's only 2 grams a square meter because you haven't got any grass seed in there. So again, no point in upping the sowing rate. You're not actually going to get a better result. It needs to be done correctly. So that works really well. And as I say, it's a bit easy to establish than the meadow mix, which would be the 80-20 mixes. Yellow rattle is probably something that a few of you might have heard of, not everyone. It is known in the trade as the meadow maker. So the reason it comes across as that is to actually suppress the grasses. So yellow rattle is semi-parasitic, feeds on grass roots. So it actually weakens the grass sward as such. It's a self-seeding native species. It's an annual, so it needs to do its self-seeding to establish for the following year. But when it's doing well, once it establishes, you'll notice that the grass areas do tend to open up a little bit, become less dense, and you've got spaces there for the wildflowers to actually come through. Whereas normally, a lot of the time, they would actually be crowded out by the grasses. So yellow rattle is a really good species to include in your mixes, and it helps to keep on top of the grass. A couple of factors to think about when you're actually looking at wildflowers. The specifications you're going to choose to actually put down. Soil type is really important, to be perfectly honest. If you do know the soil type, then we can recommend a mix which is going to fit that. It's the best way to go about it. So if you've got a particularly heavy clay soil mix, If it's a quite light, free draining loam soil, then you've got mixes which are particularly suitable for that, and it's got the right species in there to succeed. Environmental considerations. So here we're talking about, is it a particularly shady spot? Is it a hedgerow? Is it semi-shade? It might be a coastal area where you've got very sandy soil. Those particular scenarios, we've got mixes which are suitable for those, and we've picked up the right species for it. So it's good to actually do that if you can. Conservation objectives. We'll always look at the possibility of putting together a particular bespoke mix for something that is a particular aim of the project, for example. We have got mixes for attracting butterflies. We've got a mix which helps with the wild birds, providing some supplementary seed feed from the plants over winter. So that's a good one for that. We even have mixes that can help to attract bats if that's part of the conservation aim. And I mean, with a bat mix, what we're doing with that is we're including wildflower species that will attract night flying insects, which go on to be the prey of the bat. So if you've got the right flowers in place, the insects will come in, feed at night, the bats will be around, and it helps to keep the bat population going in that particular area. Slightly random slide here, but it's nice to just share a little fun fact with people. So there's an inventor called Georges de Mistral in the 1940s, or this was in the 1940s at least, who was out walking with his dogs, and when he got home, they found the small seed heads stuck to his clothing, stuck to the dog, and when he started looking at it in depth as he was picking them off, noticed that there's a very, very small hook at the end of each of the spikes, and that's why it was getting latched onto the fabric and the fur. So what we found there is that that could be a scenario that would be useful in everyday life, and that is literally the hook and loop fastener, which most of us will know as Velcro. So it just shows that nature can inspire various different people in various different walks of life, and can provide really good solutions such as that. So just to just skip through these reasonably quickly, but a little bit about the range of mixes that we do to help encourage biodiversity and wildlife. So the heritage range that we've got is the main premium mix. What we've got there is a selection of mixes which have got particularly high diversity of species in there, including some of the less common species. So it's going to provide a really rich habitat once it establishes. Really good for domestic property, an area that might have a particular wildflower bent to it. So we're really trying to encourage the wildlife. The heritage range would be really good for that. Then we've got the professional range, which is probably more suited, more aimed at looking at larger scale sowings. So lots of species again, probably still 15 to 20 species per mix. Slightly more common species that are suited to those particular scenarios. I mentioned before about the different soil types. We've got that in the professional range there, as well as the heritage range. We do include the basic mixes, which are part of the professional range. That, if there was such a thing as a general purpose wildflower mix, the basic mixes would be it. So that includes things which are going to do well in most scenarios. If you don't know too much about the soil, if it's not too extreme as a site when it comes to the site conditions, the basic mixes do quite well in that kind of scenario there. And then the impact range, which this might be the image here. When people think about wildflower, they think that that's the kind of quintessential look. Well, the impact range is actually made up of mainly annual, native and non-native. So our main speciality is in native wildflower species, but the impact range does provide that extra bit of colour and includes some non-natives in there as well. And where that comes into its own really is where you're looking to cut down on maintenance of grass cutting. So you're looking at a lot of amenity areas sometimes might be roundabouts or road verges. So what you do with that is you incorporate an annual seed mix into the annual maintenance. You sow it, let it grow right the way through the sowing, through the planting and the flowering season, sorry. And then at the end of the year, it gets cut back, re-prepared, and you put a new mix down and you just do it once per year. So in that way, you're looking to cut down on the costs of actually doing the maintenance of the grass cutting. And we can get now the pre-grown wildflower mats. So it's a really quick way of introducing habitat, which is including some more established wildflowers. So it's pre-grown on flower farms, specialize in this kind of product. Lots of different types are available now. If you actually purchase and install it somewhere between April and September, it will be cut prior to actually being delivered, so that it can be rolled up. And then once you've actually installed it, and you install it just the same way as you would with a grass turf, so it's very easy to lay. And within a couple of weeks, if it's during the season, you've got flowering plants again, and that just is going to get more mature year on the year. But if you need something that's particularly mature for a scheme, then this works quite well, and you can actually have that bespoke grown now as well. Buds and bulbs, also great for encouraging biodiversity. What you're looking at is something which is slightly pre-grown, so you haven't got to wait for the seeds to germinate, do the maintenance to make sure they establish well. You've got small plants which are ready to go, basically. So if you're really looking to get some impact, looking to create that habitat, ready for the biodiversity to find it, then plants is the ideal scenario for that, really. And wildflower bulbs would be similar. We're now coming into, we're into the spring bulb planting season, so we'll start to see the bluebells and the snowdrops, native daffodils, that sort of thing. So that's all happening now. And then you've obviously, you can put the bulbs in the autumn planting season, as well as dry dormant bulbs. So that wraps that side of things up today. As I said, I'm not sure whether we'll actually be doing any questions here and now. I'll leave that with John and Kate, but just to say thank you for listening. You can check out our websites, and if you have any queries, then you can always drop me a line. So thanks again, and I will now come off the screen, and hopefully the other guys can start talking in here again.
Yeah, well, thank you, Stuart. And again, thank you to Green Tech for being the event supporter today. They came to me and said, we thought we'd do something slightly different this time, and wildflowers and what have you. And again, I hope you found that really interesting and rewarding. I think given the numbers, Stuart, we probably will not go out to questions because it's difficult to pick people up. But Stuart, did you give you his email address? And if you didn't pick that up, we can supply it. And I know that he'd be more than happy to respond to questions. I think that's right, Stuart, isn't it? Oh, he's there somewhere, but he's muted, I think. Okay, everybody else hear me? Just wave if you can. Yeah, that's good. Right. What I want to just finish up with, and we are coming to a conclusion, but I just got 3 slides. So if you give me 1 second. Right. I just wanted 3 slides just again to make sure, because there are people on the chat function and others have said to me, we're still not absolutely clear what the amenity standard is. So there's just 3 quick slides here. Basically, I want to reassure people that the amenity standard is not another assurance scheme. It's not an extra cost. The cost of being able to say that you're operating to the standard is that you are a member of a recognised assurance scheme. So we have an external auditor who audits an assurance scheme and satisfies himself or herself that it comes to the standard. Then you can display the standard. So we've had somebody on today, for example, who said they're a member of Lawn Assured, and they are able to say that the standard and display the logo. And I was quite impressed the other day. I do use a lawn care company for my lawn, and when they arrived with their van, it was really good to see fairly prominent on the side of the van was the amenity standard. And what was even more impressive was when I asked the operative what it was, he knew exactly what it was. So I think that's where we're trying to go with that standard. And it really is, as I say, very, very important that this is about having an industry benchmark, having a way of assuring the public, everybody else, that we operate to the standard. And for this is an event primarily focused on England. But for example, in Scotland, before Christmas, the minister in Scotland wrote to all the local authorities and was basically saying, you should always be looking for someone who does your work to be operating at the amenity standard. If we can get every national government to do exactly the same thing, and the UK government, that will be a major step forward. The three schemes that are currently recognised are Basis Amenity Assured, the PCA Code on Invasive Weed Management, and Basis Lawn Assured. But during this year, two other schemes have been drawn up. One relates to the golf courses, Golf Assurance Scheme, and the other one for sports surfaces and sports stadiums. Both of those schemes have now gone through a process of development. They've been externally audited. The only thing is that we're not going for a major a major launch of those, given the current conditions. But hopefully, once we're in better conditions, we can. But these have been both supported by Bigger, and I think at their summer event that they're planning, they will be promoting it quite heavily, and equally with the sports associations as well. So I just wanted to be clear, that's what those are. This has been a very different event. Normally I would spend time after this event, there'd be lots of people talking to me, we'd have a really good lunch and a chin wag about all sorts. I hope, however, it hasn't been too bad. I hope you have gained from it. Again, can I thank the external speakers? Can I thank particularly Adrian? I thought that was a great talk. The only thing, Adrian, is you've got to do it all over again, my friend. But we get better as we go along. Remember the dates that are coming forward. There's Thursday, this Thursday, the 11th, at the same time. That will have a Welsh focus, and it's been the event supporter is Complete Weed Control. We then have on Tuesday the 23rd, another one, an England focus, which is the supporter will be Headland Amenity. On the 25th of February, we have one with a Northern Ireland focus, and that will be interesting because, as Adrian said, there are certain things around Northern Ireland that are different, and I'm really grateful that ICL have agreed to support that. And then we finish up in Bonnie, Scotland, although this time I won't be in Bonnie, Scotland. I'll be in Warwickshire talking to Scotland on the 6th of March. And as I say, we're grateful to tell you we've got the Minister coming to give a presentation of that, which I think is great because they're very supportive of what we do, as are, in fact, Wales and others as well. I think, unless there are any burning questions that have not been covered, we can let you all go off and have your lunches. You can go and have your afternoon exercise or whatever you do. Are there any other questions? Do shout out if there are any things that people want to ask that they haven't had a chance to ask.
John, can I just say there are basis points available. If you want to claim them, if you email me with your basis name or your basis number and your name, I'll add you to the register to claim basis points.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So if you've got basis points, would there be anybody who would be on the NROSA, on City and Guilds NROSA scheme or whatever?
If there is, then you can do the same thing. I think I've got a NROSA register, so you can send it across if you wish.
Okay. Good. Well, I hope that, as I say, I hope that's been useful. Thank you all for your time. I can say that I think it's been very successful, the number coming there. Remember the key messages: amenity standard, public awareness, and remember what Adrian said about reapprovals and approvals, and it's a developing landscape. So we will, as a forum, try to keep you fully informed, because it is all changing as we move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would say safe journey home, but I suspect a lot of you already are there. Take care. Bye.
Thanks all. Thanks, John. Bye.